In 1913, Argentina was one of the 10 wealthiest countries on Earth. Economists weren't being poetic when they compared it to the United States. They were reading the data. The land was massive. The exports were booming. Immigrants were pouring in by the millions, chasing the same dream people were chasing in New York and Chicago. Buenos Aires had opera houses, grand boulevards, and a skyline that made visiting Europeans stop and stare. This was supposed to be one of the great success stories of the 20th century. Instead, it became one of the great warnings. Because in December 2001, a woman named Rosa stood outside her bank in Buenos Aires for 4 hours, withdrawal slip in hand, life savings inside. The lights were on, the tellers were at their desks, and the bank still wouldn't let her in. This is how a country destroys itself. And more importantly, who's responsible when it does? Let's start with just how good it actually was. In 1900, Argentina was pulling in more foreign investment than almost anywhere outside the United States. British banks were financing its railways. French architects were designing its public buildings. The beef and wheat coming out of the Pampas grasslands was feeding half of Europe. By 1913, the average Argentine was earning more than the average Italian or Spaniard, the very countries most of them had come from. Then the 1930s hit. The global depression wiped out Argentina's export prices overnight. The economy contracted. And instead of letting the political process work through it, the military decided they'd seen enough. In 1930, General Jose Uriburu marched troops into the capital and removed the elected president. The rationale was that the civilians had failed. Someone needed to take charge. Here's what actually happened. Between 1930 and 1983, Argentina had 24 presidents. 6 of them were democratically elected. The other 18 came to power through force, backroom deals, or both. Every time a civilian government started to stabilize things, building real institutions, restoring investor confidence, developing a functioning middle class, a general somewhere decided it was time to reset the board, and every reset set the country back further than the last one, not just economically, psychologically. When you grow up in a country where the rules can change overnight depending on who has the most guns, you stop planning for the long term. You stop saving. You stop trusting the institutions that are supposed to protect you. Why would you? They've never protected you before. That slow erosion of trust is what made everything that came later possible. Now here's where it gets complicated, because the next chapter isn't a story about a villain. Juan Perón came to power in 1946 with a mandate from people who had genuinely been ignored for decades: industrial workers, rural poor, migrants who had built the country's economy and seen almost none of the reward. He raised wages, built schools and hospitals in places that had never had them, created pensions and labor protections that for the first time gave ordinary Argentines something to hold on to. His wife Evita became a symbol bigger than the government itself. The crowds loved him. The popularity was real. The problem was the money. None of it was paid for. Perón funded the spending by printing pesos. When the pesos lost value, he printed more. When inflation climbed, he froze prices by law. When frozen prices caused empty shelves, he blamed foreign corporations and speculators. It was a perfect political strategy and an economic time bomb, and every government that came after him used the exact same playbook. By 1989, Argentina's annual inflation rate hit 3,000%. 3,000% per year. What does that actually feel like? You get paid on Friday. By Tuesday, your salary has already lost real value. You don't save money because saving money is financial suicide. You spend everything immediately on anything physical, appliances, furniture, foreign currency, because holding Argentine pesos is a guaranteed loss. Businesses can't make contracts. Banks stop functioning. The basic deal that holds a modern economy together, that your money today will be worth roughly the same amount tomorrow, completely breaks down. Argentina had been living like that, on and off, for decades. By 1991, the country was desperate enough to try something drastic. Economy Minister Domingo Cavallo introduced what he called convertibility. The idea was simple: peg the Argentine peso to the US dollar, 1-to-1, fixed by law. The central bank would hold enough dollar reserves to back every peso in circulation, and you could convert freely, anytime, no questions asked. It was a straitjacket, deliberately so. The whole point was to make it legally impossible for the government to print its way out of trouble again. And for a few years, it worked brilliantly. Inflation died almost overnight. The economy grew, factories reopened, foreign investors came back. The IMF pointed at Argentina and said, "This is the model." Entire economic conferences were held debating what Argentina had gotten right. The middle class rebuilt itself. People started saving again. For the first time in a generation, ordinary Argentines felt like the ground beneath them was solid. But convertibility had a flaw buried in its foundation that nobody in power wanted to acknowledge. Pegging your currency to the dollar means your economy and the US economy move together whether you want them to or not. When the dollar strengthened through the late 1990s, the peso strengthened with it, making Argentine exports expensive, crushing the farmers and manufacturers who kept the country running. A weaker peso would have fixed it. But the law said no. So instead of adjusting the currency, the government borrowed from foreign banks, from the IMF, to cover the interest on what it had already borrowed, and it told everyone the fundamentals were sound. By 2001, Argentina owed more than $140 billion in foreign debt. The IMF, the same institution that had praised Argentina for a decade, quietly started pulling back. International credit dried up. And when the credit stopped, the whole thing came down at once. December 2001. Foreign investors are pulling money out of Argentine banks in waves. The government watches the reserves drain and makes its decision. On December 3rd, they announced the corralito, the little fence. Starting immediately, Argentines can only withdraw 250 pesos per week from their own accounts. Their money is still there. Technically, they just can't touch it. People show up at ATMs and find them capped. They line up outside banks and find the doors blocked. They sit in front of televisions and watch their government explain, in careful bureaucratic language, that their savings are inaccessible for their own protection. Within days, the streets are not safe. Supermarkets are looted. Pots and pans bang from apartment windows across Buenos Aires, the sound that had become the national signal for enough. Protests turn into marches. Marches turn into riots. Police fire into crowds. In 2 days, 39 people are killed. On the evening of December 19th, President Fernando de la Rua declares a state of emergency. By the following afternoon, he is gone, lifted off the roof of the Casa Rosada by helicopter while the crowd below chants for his head. What came next was something no functioning country is supposed to be able to say. Argentina went through 5 presidents in 11 days. One of them lasted 24 hours. The country defaulted on $100 billion in foreign debt, the largest default in history at the time. The convertibility law was scrapped. The peso lost 70% of its value in weeks. The middle class that had spent the 1990s carefully rebuilding, saving, doing everything right, was gutted overnight. People who had deposited dollars got back devalued pesos. Retirees lost their pensions. Businesses that had borrowed in dollars owed amounts they could never repay. Rosa eventually got her money back, in pesos worth a fraction of what she had deposited. She had trusted the system. The system spent that trust. So how does a country that was supposed to be a superpower end up destroying itself? The easy answer is corruption. And yes, there was plenty of it. But the harder answer is that Argentina's collapse wasn't one crime. It was 100 years of short-term decisions made by people who knew better and chose not to care. Generals who wanted control more than stability. Politicians who wanted votes more than honest budgets. International lenders who kept extending credit to a borrower they knew couldn't pay, and looked away when it collapsed. And the people who paid for those decisions were never the ones making them. They were standing outside the bank, withdrawal slip in hand, waiting for a door that wasn't going to open. That's the real lesson. Collapse is always preventable, right up until the moment it isn't.